what I thought that I would do is just start by setting the scene. Now, there's a lot here that I'd like to focus on, and it's really about how can you make your journey with Parkinson's from your diagnosis to be the best possible life and enjoy yourself and have the best possible kind of chances at maintaining your quality of life. And I think the way to do this is through self-empowerment. And on that note, I'm just going to start with some amazingly positive news for Oxfordshire, which is that after 18 months of working on a business case to get a new consultant in to support phospholevodopa therapy for people with complex Parkinson's, we got approval for this new consultant, 50% of a new Parkinson nurse, and a new neurological pharmacist to support this. So that is wonderful news. And it means that we can have more hands on board to help you in your journey for self-empowerment. Particularly wanted to thank Caroline Rassel, who's the CEO coming later, Parkinson's UK, the local branch, who actually helped me by doing a questionnaire in which people actually put online. We had about 45 respondents. What's the effect on you of waiting more than a year to be seen for your diagnosis and then to be followed up? So thank you for that. So today I'm going to be talking to you about research-informed top tips. What are my top tips? I've been a consultant 20 years. How can we get the diagnosis right from the start? How has the local group and people with Parkinson's informed us in that journey? What is the evidence base for exercise, diet and supplements and CBT? And I'm always asked this in clinic, so it's been a brilliant opportunity for me to check the research. And lastly, end on tools, apps and gadgets for self-empowerment. Just to say I'm an academic founder member of New Health, and we have representatives from New Health here today. Okay, so getting the diagnosis right. This is really very much in memory of Peter Harling, who sadly passed away in the last year. And Joe Bromley and I, the Parkinson nurse, went to his funeral and met his wonderful family. Peter actually did this, which talks about the phases of emotional impact on having a diagnosis of Parkinson's, going through shock, disbelief, denial, through to anger, frustration, and then starting to reason and rationalise what am I going to do, how does this affect me. There's often a period of depression followed by acceptance, and this for some people takes years. And some people have never moved on. I think it's fair to say in my, that I come across. But if you can go through these phases and have support from your family, your friends, but also health professionals, you're going to do much better in your journey. So with Peter, and also people like Sally Bromley, who's here today, and also Alex Reed, who set up the European Parkinson Therapy Centre, supported by Johnny Collett and Helen Dawes from Brooks. We set up First Steps, and this was the first of its kind in the world, as far as I'm aware, because it's designed by people with Parkinson's, and it's also delivered and led by people with Parkinson's with input from health professionals. And what we were able to show in this initial year of study is that it was working, it was tractable, and that there were improvements in outcomes like mood, quality of life. We then, I think COVID happened possibly about 2-3 years after the first steps, which we were having in Whitney Lake Golf Course, and Parkinson's UK then helped us and supported us, and it became a more national programme that was, during COVID and the aftermath, largely done online. And here's some of the information on that. It's now, I believe, restarted in person. And here is, just some feedback from a person with Parkinson's and their partner, talking about the impact that this has had on helping them to understand their Parkinson's and relieving the fear and anxiety that they felt after diagnosis. And then Andrew Soundy and others looked at longer-term outcomes of this intervention, looked at 18 people who had Parkinson's and had gone to First Steps, as well as the reunions at 6 months and the refresher at 1 year, compared them to 22 controls. So this is a qualitative study. It used a semi-structured interview, but it found improved exercise behaviour and coping mechanisms in the people who'd taken part. So this is really important, and how you convey the diagnosis and the support that you offer through yourself as a consultant, your team, but also through the Parkinson nurse and through being able to tell people about these causes is really key. So what's really needed at giving someone the diagnosis? The first thing is time. You have to spend time with the patient. I have argued and finally had agreed that I needed 30 minutes instead of 20 for a new person with Parkinson's, but it's usually 45 minutes, and I'll run late, as everybody here knows. Anyone who sees me will know by the end of my clinic I'm usually an hour late. But that's because a new diagnosed person needs time, and you have to work out their symptoms, establish rapport. You need to decide with them at that first visit what are the implications for them on things like driving, working, quality of life, treatments, and consider research. I would always say, tell them about research at the first diagnosis, and I'll go on and show you someone who's benefited from that. We provide written information that tells them about exercise, tells them about CBT, introduces the local team, and we introduce Parkinson's UK. And then after that, people, according to NICE guidelines, need regular access for clinical monitoring, medication adjustment. Some of this can now be done remotely through the use of apps, such as the New Health app, but also they need a point of contact, and that's difficult when you don't have an NHS secretary for any period of time, but we do now have somebody, and we're hoping to move that forward. So just tell me a little bit about what brought you to the research clinic today in Oxford.
Well, today I got an invitation, and I never refuse an invitation to come to research, because one of the things the very first consultant I saw told me early on was that patients who engage in these kind of things, these research programs, tend to have better outcomes than patients that don't. And that convinced me. So every time you get in touch with me and say, can you do this, can you do that? It's always an automatic yes from me and from my wife as well.
Fantastic. And what was the sort of symptom that you'd seen the consultant for?
Originally it was, later turned out to be RBD, but I went to a sleep clinic and they videoed me overnight, and I had to put all this stuff, stickers and things all over my head, and they said, now go to sleep.
Impossible.
Yeah, well, it was impossible. But I was having a lot of dreams where I was fighting a tiger, or I'd have a dream where my boss, I'd be waiting for a lift, the lift doors would open, my boss would jump out and grab me around by the throat, and I'd be fighting him off in my dream, but actually in bed as well, quite often clonking Alison on her head. I actually broke my finger on the bedside table. Yeah. And here I am now, a few years later, coming to all of these clinics. So I would never miss one, ever.
Yeah. How do you find it taking part in the research clinics? And you come every 18 months.
Yeah. I've actually been to more than...
You've done extra ones, I think.
Extra ones for special research that the different researchers are doing. I actually find it enjoyable. It's quite good to get a little bit of a look behind the scenes, behind the curtain. What's that phrase? Penambic. Yeah. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's one of those things where you can pay a bit of attention to what's going on, because if you just turn up to a clinic, you don't get anything like the same level of engagement. All the stuff that I've got from you today, it all helps me to get some idea of where I am in the whole scheme of things, which helps in life. Yeah. So that's where I am with it.
Fantastic. And what about your episodes of night now with the RBD? Are you on some treatment? Has that changed?
Yeah. So as a result of the medical, the non-research stuff, I've been put onto medication which has now pretty much eliminated that, not entirely. Occasionally it happens, but there were other things that were discovered along the way, like RLS, restless leg syndrome, and sometimes that has a really bad effect on my sleep, which has a really bad effect on my life, which has a really bad effect on my relationship, which has a really bad effect on Alison's sleep. So all of these things are linked together. So by coming here, you know, and getting the right treatment, getting put onto the right medication, those things are largely better now. I still have good days and bad days, good months and bad months, but mostly things are manageable.
Yeah.
And before they weren't.
No. So hopefully that has just given you a flavour of how we work with individuals, both with Parkinson's and early Parkinson's. So I'm going to move on to the exercise base. What is the proof that shows that exercise in Parkinson's works? And this is a trial. It's a phase 2 trial. So it's relatively early, and it was done by the American group, I think, yes. And what they did, took very early people with Parkinson's, so Hernan-Yar 1 to 2 out of a total worst stage of 5, meaning they were untreated and also were not expected to be on medication for 6 months during the exercise trial. And the reason for this is that if you have treatment with levodopa, your symptoms improve and your examination improves. And if you do an overnight withdrawal, that doesn't get rid of the benefit. In fact, it can persist for up to 7 or 14 days after you've stopped taking your medication. So what they were given is three days a week of 45 minutes exercise treadmill, and they looked at the outcome of the UPDRS motor score. They had 128 people in total randomised to either high or moderate intensity, and then usual care, which is really up to you about whether you did any exercise or not. They showed significant differences in the UPDRS motor scores, but it's quite important to recognise that about 1 in 3 people did have some exercise-related complications, like falling off a treadmill or injuring their ankle. So it's really worth seeing a physio before you start on this and getting a proper assessment of your heart, making sure musculoskeletally that you're given a regime that you can do. And this study here, which was led by Bas Bloem's group in Holland, showed quite similar effects and benefits, but these were people who were on treatment and on a stable dose. Again, off-state motor scores, significant improvement in favour of those given aerobic exercise. We then did a study working with Helen Brooks, where we took people with Parkinson's and we exercised them on a bike, and we looked at how well they could exercise against resistance. It's a bit like cycling uphill. How long are you going to go before you sort of call it and just step off before you collapse, sort of thing, into the brambles? And what we found is that people with Parkinson's had an overall 30% improvement in their ability to cycle against resistance. And what's really interesting to me is the individual differences that you can see here. So this person and these two have had a massive improvement in their ability, and then others have sort of got a bit worse on the ketone drink. So fascinating. How can we predict at individual level improvements? So in summary, exercise in Parkinson's is good. There's a lot of emerging data to show that it probably slows down progression over time, and that is what we would call neuroprotective benefit. It also helps a lot for other non-motor symptoms like depression, anxiety and sleep. And I'm telling everybody at diagnosis to exercise, even the elderly person with bilateral hip and knee replacements. We are very lucky here to have a PDPS physio service from neurological therapists, some of whom are here today. We'll be talking about their research. Okay, what about diet? So I got really interested in diet. The reason is I was in Africa and I spent a week in Tanzania in the footsteps of, slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. And there was a trial that was done there, which I'll talk about shortly. But there is quite a lot of evidence of diet and supplements. And this is a sort of meta-analysis which took people with Parkinson's at one time point, and there was quite a good number there. There were 1,053, And there did seem to be some reduced progression, and they used what was called a patient-related or patient-reported outcome, or PRO-PD. So the people that had more fresh vegetables, fruit, nuts and seeds, non-fried fish, olive oil, wine, coconut oil, so it's Mediterranean and sort of African diet, did much better. There was also things like canned fruits and canned vegetables, soda drinks, fizzy drinks, fried foods, red meat, beef, ice cream did worse, okay? And things like coenzyme Q10 and fish oil were associated with a mild benefit in Parkinson's progression, whereas iron supplementation made you progress faster. Okay, so this is the first data to show that targeted nutrition can actually power Parkinson's progression. Then, what about if you think of a diet and your lifestyle? The next question is, what happens if you've always been quite good at eating healthily? What effect does that have on whether you're going to have symptoms or subsequently be diagnosed with prodromal Parkinson's? And this study actually showed, again, that there was an association between your diet pattern and how many prodromal Parkinson features like RBD or constipation or loss of sense of smell. And that again showed that it was a healthy eating diet and a Mediterranean diet that was beneficial. And here you can see again the sorts of things in yellow that help: fruit, vegetables, nuts, and moderate alcohol. This is a Rotterdam study, and it looked actually at people over time. So the advantage of this is it's longitudinal, and it looked at the risk between overall diet quality and Parkinson risk in a general population. And 9,414 people from Rotterdam were asked to fill in their diet, and then they looked at them and saw that over a 14.1 year period, 129 people diagnosed with Parkinson's. And they used something called principal component analysis, and they identified a prudent or wise diet, a traditional diet, an unhealthy diet. And the main part of this is that the beneficial diets were Mediterranean and prudent. The unhealthy, again, is fried diet, fried foods, convenience foods. Okay? And we know now from several studies that your microbiome, which is your composition of microbes in your gut, and also that we measure in your poo, is affected by what you eat. Now, this study by Susan Laurie is interesting because, again, it looked at, could we, in fact this is by our group, yes. So here we asked you to do a questionnaire, and we had just under 162 people in our cohort who were asked to fill in their diet. We looked at their neurocore fatigue levels, Epworth sleep scale, apathy and cognitive function. And what we were able to show was that fatigue and depression were modulated or modified by your diet and more healthy diet. Now, how could all this work? How does it all fit together? Well, I've talked about the microbiome of the gut, which people are increasingly aware of. And this is one of the first studies to show that the Mediterranean diet alters your gut microbiome and reduces constipation for people with Parkinson's, but also it reduces calprotectin, which is a measure in your gut of gut inflammation. Now, to sort of get a bit of a better understanding about this, we need to start thinking about the gut-brain axis, and you're going to hear a bit more about this from Livia's study later today. And in this study, they used a rodent model of Parkinson's, and they took poo samples from 3 people with Parkinson's and 3 controls, and they gave them, what did they do? They created from that the microbiome of bacteria, and then they had a cell model of a gut where they either gave Simprove or not, and they used these two different microbiomes to look at the effect on inflammation in the gut. And what you can see here is that the healthy control microbiome was associated with higher levels of good anti-inflammatory proteins, but that the people with Parkinson's had much lower. So when Simprove, which is a probiotic, was given, over just 48 hours, there was an improvement in the microbiome and bacterial composition. There was improved or reduced levels of short-chain fatty acids and lactate, and good anti-inflammatory cytokines were also improved with Simprove. And then this study took a rat model, and here they actually measured symptoms in the rat, and they looked at the inflammation in the brain, and the rat was either treated with a sham treatment or with a type of experimental protocol using the Parkinson's microbiome. And these are very small, but the main take-home message is that they were able to show that the rats treated with Simprove had a significant reduction in the loss of dopaminergic brain neurons. So how are we getting from the gut to the brain? We know that the vagus nerve goes all the way from the gut up to the brain. We know that there are other areas, for example, if you eat something, it can go into the blood, and from the blood, cross the blood-brain barrier. So this is really interesting data showing that Simprove treatment in this animal model of Parkinson's reduced measures of inflammation and was associated over a short period of time by reduced loss of dopaminergic brain neurons. So this is important. Simprove, I believe, is available. I have been telling my patients we're not there because we don't have the data. This is the first data in humans. It was presented in an abstract, and what they showed there was a similar improvement in blood inflammation, improvement in non-motor symptoms like fatigue in people with Parkinson's, and this was in the SIM-PD trial. So nothing after this, apart from a PhD thesis report. So we need the full report now, we need the full paper, but I think there's a lot of powerful evidence that's persuaded me, a skeptic, of the value of a full-strain probiotic. And I did Google it. If you commit to something like longer-term treatment, more than 6 months, it's about £40 to £50 a month for Simprove. Now, I mentioned I was in Tanzania, and while I was there, they did a study, and it came out literally the 2 weeks before I arrived. What they did here in Kilimanjaro was to take 77 young men, no women, don't ask me why, and they took people who were ranges of different body mass index, and they took rural men who were eating an African heritage diet, shown here, which included banana millet beer. Is that right? I can't see from here. Oh no, this is the Western diet, and this is the African heritage. So they had to drink a litre of banana millet beer, which only had 1% alcohol over a day, and they also had no meat, and it was all vegetarian sources of protein. So these people were then given the Western diet for 2 weeks. People normally in an urban environment in Kilimanjaro were randomised to this African heritage diet. And after only 2 weeks, there was a significant improvement in the inflammatory markers in the blood and in oxidative stress markers in those given their African heritage diet. So this is fascinating to me. And a further study is ongoing, studying men and women and looking at the effects of exercise as well. So in summary, diet in Parkinson's, there's now several human studies showing evidence of benefits of Mediterranean diet, coenzyme Q10 and fish oil supplements in slowing down Parkinson's progression. There's growing evidence that Parkinson's is reduced by the Mediterranean healthy diet, and in particular, foods that seem to be beneficial are high amounts of fresh fruit, vegetables, nuts, moderate alcohol. There's good data on Simprove, and there's also good data on heritage diets and fermented drinks, alcohol or cabbage like kimchi. So just to end, the evidence base for CBT. So CBT is a type of cognitive behavioural therapy. It's what we would use for people with anxiety and depression, for example, and you can self-refer yourself in most places in the UK. It's called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. So this is the best data, and it's a large meta-analysis of 12 studies, 241 people with Parkinson's, showing it significantly reduces anxiety and depression, okay, on a par of an effect with an antidepressant. And it can be delivered both traditionally and using telemedicine, okay? So I'm going to skip through that, apart from an interesting thing on light therapy. So light therapy was giving you a type of light first thing in the morning, and then looking at how that actually improves your mood, and found significant improvements in your sleep and in depression. Okay, this CBT approach has also been used for impulsive compulsive behaviours, which many people with Parkinson's can have, and also it's been suggested as an acute treatment for psychosis, which is when people become quite agitated, confused, hallucinate, and are worried that people might be harming them or doing things out of control. So in summary, CBT in Parkinson's works. There's particularly strong evidence that it works for depression and anxiety. There's good evidence for ICB benefit, but we need more research. Lastly, tools and gadgets for self-empowerment. I want to just mention I was at a meeting for grant holders in Parkinson's UK, and I met this wonderful man called Kuhan Pushparatnam, who works in IT, and at the time of his diagnosis, as somebody with young onset Parkinson's, thought there's nothing out there that's going to help me with my day-to-day problems. And he designed, supported by Parkinson's UK, a free app called Parkinson's On. And you can download this from the internet, and it's a really neat way of helping you to program your phone for medication reminders, activity logs, so how much exercise or you've done, what your symptoms have been, and what are the insights. And it also has a lot of self-care and how to get involved in research. And he, as part of a 2 Parkies in a Pod podcast, which I'd highly recommend as well. And the second app is New Health, which I've been involved with, because we offer this 7-minute series of tasks, and you're going to hear more about that today. And it's now being used in over 10 NHS trusts, and it's being used in hospitals across the US to see if it can reduce patient burden, improve clinician decision making. For example, is DBS the right thing for you or not? So that's the end of my talk. Sorry to have bombarded you. I think we might have a session later for Q&A, but I'm going to hand over now to Tanya, who is our statistician